Beatrice Vance clutched the wooden post of her bedroom window, knuckles white as she gazed across the vast Wyoming landscape that had once represented freedom, but now felt like the bars of a gilded cage. In 3 days, she would be married to Franklin Townsend, a man 30 years her senior with cold eyes and hands that lingered too long whenever they touched her. The year 1876 had started with such promise, but as autumn approached, her future had never looked bleaker. Beatrice. Her mother's voice carried up the stairs of their sprawling ranch house. "Mr. Townsend will be arriving for dinner in an hour. Please make yourself presentable." Beatrice released a shaky breath, watching a lone rider on the horizon. How she envied that distant figure free to roam where the wind took them, unencumbered by societal expectations or desperate parents hoping to save their failing cattle ranch through an advantageous marriage. "I heard you, Mother," she called back, though her eyes remained fixed on the rider until they disappeared behind a distant hill. Her room, once a sanctuary filled with books about adventure and distant lands, now felt like a prison. At 20 years old, Beatrice had imagined a different life for herself. Perhaps attending university back east like her cousin Margaret, or at least marrying someone she chose herself. Someone closer to her age, someone she could love. She moved to her wardrobe and pulled out the midnight blue dress her mother insisted brought out her eyes. As she dressed, she caught her reflection in the looking-glass honey-colored hair pinned too tightly, blue eyes dulled by resignation, and a smile that no longer reached them. The dinner that evening progressed like every other engagement with Franklin Townsend, tedious conversation about cattle prices, banking investments, and Franklin's plans for their future. Beatrice pushed her food around her plate, offering polite nods when appropriate. "I've taken the liberty of selecting the furniture for the master bedroom," Franklin said, his gaze lingering on her in a way that made her skin crawl. "My home in Cheyenne will need a woman's touch, but I thought it best to start with quality pieces." "How thoughtful," Beatrice's mother interjected when the silence stretched too long. "Isn't that thoughtful, Beatrice?" "Yes, quite," she managed, taking a long sip of water to avoid further comment. Franklin dabbed at his mustache with a napkin. "I've also arranged for a dressmaker to visit next week. You'll need a more appropriate wardrobe as the wife of a bank president." Her father cleared his throat. "Franklin has been most generous in advancing us the capital needed for next season's breeding stock. Without his investment, I fear the Vance Ranch would face foreclosure by spring." The implication hung heavy in the air. Her marriage was the collateral for this loan, her future traded for cattle and land. Later that night, after Franklin had departed with a dry kiss to her hand and promises of their bright future, Beatrice sat alone on the porch swing, staring at the vast expanse of stars overhead. "It won't be so terrible, darling," her mother said, stepping outside with a shawl that she draped around Beatrice's shoulders. "Many successful marriages begin as arrangements. Love can grow." Beatrice turned to her mother, tears gathering. "And what if it doesn't? What if I spend the rest of my life with a man who sees me as nothing more than a possession? Another acquisition like his banking interests or his thoroughbred horses?" Her mother's face softened with sympathy, but her resolve remained firm. "We have no choice, Beatrice. The drought last year, followed by the harsh winter, we've lost nearly half our herd. Your father's heart can't take losing the land his father built. Franklin Townsend is offering security. For you and father, perhaps, but what about my security? My happiness?" Her mother pressed her lips together. "Happiness is a luxury, Beatrice. Survival comes first." With those words hanging in the air, her mother retreated inside, leaving Beatrice alone with the weight of familial duty pressing down upon her. The following morning, Beatrice rode out at dawn, seeking solace in the one freedom she still possessed: her daily rides across the expansive Vance property. Astride her mare Penny, she galloped across the rolling hills, her hair coming loose from its pins, streaming behind her like a golden banner. It was during this ride that she first saw him, a tall figure on a magnificent black stallion, moving with the confidence of someone who had spent his life in the saddle. He was herding several strays back toward the neighboring Carson property. Beatrice reined in Penny at the top of a rise, watching as the stranger expertly guided the cattle through a narrow pass. His movements were fluid, almost poetic in their efficiency. When he glanced up and spotted her, he tipped his hat in acknowledgement. Heart racing unexpectedly, Beatrice returned the gesture before turning Penny toward home, suddenly conscious of her wind-blown appearance and the impropriety of staring at a stranger. That evening, as Beatrice helped prepare dinner, their ranch hand Timothy burst through the kitchen door. "Mr. Vance, there's trouble at the north pasture. Looks like rustlers took down a section of fence. We're missing at least 20 head. Her father grabbed his hat. "Saddle my horse, Timothy, and tell the boys to arm themselves." "I already sent word to the Carson place," Timothy added. "They're sending help." Beatrice's father paused. "Carson? Harold Carson hasn't offered help in 5 years, not since our water rights dispute." "It's not the old man," Timothy replied. "It's his new foreman, a fella named Knox Porter, just arrived from Montana last month. He's already at the north pasture with some of Carson's men." The name sent an inexplicable flutter through Beatrice's chest. Later that night, as the men returned, Beatrice overheard her father speaking with her mother in hushed tones. "That Porter fellow tracked those rustlers 10 miles into the foothills, recovered most of our cattle before dark. Harold Carson must be paying him well to inspire such neighborly cooperation. Or perhaps he simply believes in doing what's right," her mother suggested. "Either way, I've invited him to dinner tomorrow to express our thanks. It's the least we can do." Beatrice slipped away before they noticed her eavesdropping, her mind filled with curiosity about the mysterious Knox Porter. The following evening, Beatrice took unusual care with her appearance, selecting a forest green dress that emphasized her slender waist and brought out the golden highlights in her hair. She told herself it was merely proper etiquette to look presentable for a guest, nothing more. When Knox Porter arrived, Beatrice realized with a start that he was the rider she had observed the previous day. Up close, he was even more striking, tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. He couldn't be more than 26, with laugh lines just beginning to form at the corners of his eyes. "Miss Vance," he said, removing his hat to reveal dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "It's a pleasure to make your acquaintance." His voice carried the slight drawl of someone raised further south, melodic and warm like honey over rough stones. "Mr. Porter," she replied, offering her hand. "I believe I saw you yesterday near Carson Creek." A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Indeed. Though I didn't expect such a fine lady to be riding out alone at daybreak." "Beatrice has always been headstrong," her father interjected, motioning everyone toward the dining room. "Gets it from her mother's side." Throughout dinner, Beatrice found herself drawn to Knox's stories of his travels from Texas cattle drives to Montana mining towns. He spoke with passion about the land, about horses, about the changing West with railroads pushing ever further into frontier territories. "What brought you to Wyoming, Mr. Porter?" Beatrice asked during a lull in conversation. Knox's expression grew more reserved. "I was looking for a fresh start. Wyoming seemed as good a place as any." There was clearly more to the story, but Beatrice didn't press. Instead, she found herself sharing her own love of literature, her dream of seeing the great cities of the East, perhaps even Europe one day. "The world is changing, Miss Vance," Knox said, his gaze holding hers. "I believe a determined woman could see all those places and more." The warmth in his eyes made her cheeks flush, and for the first time in months she felt a flicker of possibility, however impossible it might be. As Knox prepared to leave, he paused at his horse. "I understand congratulations are in order, Miss Vance. Mr. Townsend's upcoming nuptials are the talk of the county." The reminder of her impending marriage fell like a stone in Beatrice's stomach. "Yes, thank you." Something in her tone made Knox study her face more carefully. After a moment, he simply nodded. "Good night, Miss Vance." It was truly a pleasure. As she watched him ride away, Beatrice felt a sense of loss for something she had never possessed. The next morning, Franklin arrived unannounced, bringing with him a jeweler from Cheyenne. "I thought it time you had a proper engagement ring," he announced, as the nervous jeweler displayed several ostentatious diamond settings. "Something befitting your new station." Beatrice stared at the glittering stones with growing despair. Each facet reflected back the reality of her situation, a transaction disguised as matrimony. "This one, I think," Franklin said, not bothering to ask her preference as he selected the largest, most ornate setting. "It will make quite the impression at our wedding." As the jeweler sized the ring, Franklin spoke of his business plans, the social events they would host, the children they would have, her entire future laid out without her input or consent. That night, Beatrice couldn't sleep. The weight of the diamond on her finger felt like a shackle. Shortly before dawn, she made a decision. Dressing quickly in her riding clothes, she slipped out to the stables. "Just a morning ride, Penny," she whispered to her mare, "to clear my head." But as she rode toward Carson Creek, Beatrice knew she was hoping for more than fresh air. She was seeking answers, possibilities, perhaps even courage. She found Knox Porter mending a fence line, his sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms as he worked. He looked up at the sound of approaching hoofbeats, surprise evident on his face. "Miss Vance, you're out early again." Beatrice dismounted, suddenly uncertain why she had come. "I needed to think. This has always been my favorite spot." Knox set down his tools and approached, concern evident in his eyes. "Something troubling you?" The genuine interest in his voice broke something inside her. Before she could stop herself, words poured out: her family's financial troubles, the arranged marriage, her fears about a future with a man she could never love. "I know it sounds ungrateful," she finished, wiping away tears that had escaped despite her best efforts. "So many women would be grateful for the security Mr. Townsend offers." Knox remained silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "Security without happiness isn't much of a life, Miss Vance. What choice do I have? My parents will lose everything." Knox turned to face her fully. "There are always choices. Sometimes we just can't see them yet." Something in his expression gave her hope, dangerous, irrational hope that burned in her chest. Before she could respond, the sound of approaching riders interrupted them. "That'll be the Carson boys," Knox said, stepping back to a more appropriate distance. "You should probably head home before questions arise." Nodding, Beatrice mounted Penny, lingering just a moment longer. "Thank you for listening, Mr. Porter." "Knox," he corrected with a gentle smile. "My friends call me Knox." The day before her wedding arrived with merciless speed. The house bustled with activity, flowers being arranged, the best china unpacked, her wedding dress hanging ominously in her bedroom. Beatrice moved through final fittings and rehearsals like a sleepwalker, her thoughts constantly drifting to her conversation with Knox by Carson Creek. She hadn't seen him since that morning. though she'd heard he'd been instrumental in helping both ranches recover more stolen cattle from the rustlers who continued to plague the area. That evening, as guests began arriving for the rehearsal dinner, Beatrice excused herself to her room, claiming a headache. Sitting at her window, she watched the sunset paint the Wyoming sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Tomorrow, this view would no longer be hers. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Beatrice." It was Rosa, their housekeeper. "There's someone asking for you at the kitchen door. Says it's urgent." Curious, Beatrice followed Rosa downstairs and through the busy kitchen to the rear entrance. There, standing in the shadows, was Knox Porter. "I apologize for the intrusion," he said, his voice low. "Could we speak privately for a moment?" Heart racing, Beatrice nodded and led him to the small garden behind the kitchen where they wouldn't be observed by the arriving dinner guests. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, though she couldn't deny the thrill that ran through her at the sight of him. "If Mr. Townsend sees you, I had to come," Knox interrupted, his expression intense in the fading light. "I've been thinking about what you told me, about your situation." Beatrice wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm evening. "It doesn't matter now. The wedding is tomorrow. It doesn't have to be." Knox stepped closer. "Beatrice, I've spent my life wandering from place to place, never staying long enough to form attachments. But meeting you—" He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "I've never met anyone like you, someone with such spirit trapped in an impossible situation." "What are you saying?" Beatrice whispered, hardly daring to hope. "I'm saying there's another choice. Come with me tonight." Beatrice gasped. "Leave?" "But my family, the ranch. I've spoken with Harold Carson. He's agreed to loan your father the money he needs, a legitimate business arrangement with fair terms, not the exploitation Townsend offered." "How? Why would he do that?" Knox's smile was grim. "Carson may be stubborn, but he's fair. And he has no love for Franklin Townsend. Seems Townsend foreclosed on Carson's brother's farm some years back, causing no small amount of family tragedy." Beatrice shook her head, overwhelmed. "Even if that's true, my father would never accept charity." "It's not charity. It's business. Carson needs your father's breeding stock to improve his herd. The papers are already drawn up a partnership that benefits both ranches." "And what about me?" Beatrice asked, her voice barely audible. "What would become of me if I left?" Knox took her hands in his. "That would be your choice. I have family in Colorado. My sister runs a small hotel in a growing railroad town. You could stay with her, find work, build a life of your own choosing." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "Or you could come with me. Not as anything improper, but as a traveling companion until you decide what you want." The possibility of freedom, real freedom, made Beatrice dizzy. "Why would you do this for me? You barely know me." Knox's expression softened. "Sometimes you just know when something's right, Beatrice. I knew it the first time I saw you riding across that ridge, wild and free. A woman like you shouldn't be caged." From inside the house, Beatrice heard her mother calling her name. "I have to go," she whispered. Knox nodded, releasing her hands. "I'll be waiting at Carson Creek crossing at midnight. 1 horse for you, 1 for me, and enough supplies to reach Colorado." He stepped back. "If you don't come, I'll understand, but know that you do have a choice." With that, he disappeared into the gathering darkness, leaving Beatrice trembling with possibility and fear. The rehearsal dinner passed in a blur. Franklin's possessive hand on her waist, her father's relieved expressions as he discussed future business plans, her mother's satisfied smile at the match she had orchestrated. All around her, people celebrated what they saw as a perfect union. None of them saw the storm raging inside her. At 11 o'clock, Beatrice stood in her bedroom, staring at the wedding dress that hung like a ghost in the corner. The house had finally quieted. Making her decision, she changed into her riding clothes and packed a small bag with essential items: a change of clothes, her mother's locket, the copy of Jane Eyre that had been her grandmother's. She penned 2 letters, one to her parents explaining that she couldn't go through with the wedding but assuring them of her safety, and another to Franklin Townsend, releasing him from any obligation and suggesting he might find Carson's business proposition more profitable than a marriage to an unwilling bride. Slipping downstairs, Beatrice moved silently through the sleeping house. At the kitchen door, she hesitated, her hand on the latch. Was she being selfish, ungrateful, foolish to trust a man she barely knew? Then she remembered Knox's words: "Security without happiness isn't much of a life." Taking a deep breath, she stepped out into the night. The moon lit her path as she made her way to the stables, where she found Penny already saddled. Timothy, their most loyal ranch hand, stood in the shadows. "Timothy." "What are you?" "Mr. Porter said you might be needing Penny tonight," he said quietly. "Don't worry, Miss Beatrice. I'll make sure your parents get your letters in the morning." Tears sprang to her eyes. "Thank you. Please tell them I'm sorry." Timothy helped her mount. "No need for sorry, miss. You deserve better than old Townsend. We all think so." He patted Penny's flank. "Now go on, and good luck." Heart-pounding, Beatrice rode through the moonlit landscape, every shadow seeming to hide pursuers, every sound amplified by her nervous anticipation. What if Knox wasn't there? What if this was all an elaborate joke? What if she was making the biggest mistake of her life? As she approached Carson Creek Crossing, she saw a solitary figure on horseback, another mount at the ready beside him. Relief flooded through her. Knox's face broke into a wide smile as she approached. "You came." "I came," she confirmed, suddenly shy despite the boldness of her action. "Are you certain, Beatrice? Once we leave, there's no going back." Beatrice looked over her shoulder at the dark silhouette of her family's ranch house in the distance. Then she turned to Knox, taking in his hopeful expression, the promise of freedom in his storm-gray eyes. "I've never been more certain of anything," she said, and meant it. They rode hard through the night, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the Vance ranch before dawn. As the first light broke over the eastern horizon, they stopped to rest the horses by a small stream. "We should reach the territorial line by nightfall," Knox said, helping Beatrice down from her horse. "From there, it's 3 days to Colorado if we keep a steady pace." Beatrice stretched her aching muscles, exhilarated despite the discomfort of riding all night. "What will we do in Colorado?" Knox handed her a canteen of water. "My sister's town is growing fast with the railroad expansion. There's work for those willing to do it. I've saved enough to buy a small parcel of land, maybe start a horse breeding operation. And me? Where do I fit in this plan?" Knox's expression grew serious. "Wherever you want to, Beatrice. I meant what I said. You're free to make your own choices now. If you decide Colorado isn't for you, or—" He hesitated. "If you decide I'm not what you want, I'll make sure you're safe and settled before I move on." The sincerity in his voice touched something deep within her. "And if I decide I want to stay with you?" Knox's eyes darkened with emotion. "Then I would be the luckiest man in the territory." They continued their journey, each day bringing them further from Wyoming and closer to a new beginning. They traveled through rugged mountain passes and across expansive plains, sleeping under the stars and sharing stories of their lives. Knox told her about growing up in Texas, losing his parents to fever, working cattle drives with his uncle, until he was old enough to make his own way. He spoke of his sister Elizabeth, who had married a railroad engineer and established herself as a respectable business owner, despite the challenges faced by a woman alone in the West. In turn, Beatrice shared her childhood dreams, her love of books, her desire to see the world beyond Wyoming's borders. With each passing day, the weight of her former life lifted, replaced by a growing sense of possibility. On their fourth night, camped in a sheltered canyon, Knox finally asked the question that had been hanging between them. "Do you regret leaving?" Beatrice looked up from the small fire where she was preparing their evening meal. "No. I regret that it caused pain to my parents, but I couldn't spend my life living someone else's dream." "And what is your dream, Beatrice Vance?" she smiled, feeling the truth of her words as she spoke them. "To live honestly, to make my own choices. To find love that isn't purchased or arranged but freely given and received." Knox moved to sit beside her, his presence warm in the cool evening air. "And have you found that? Or at least glimpsed the possibility of it?" Beatrice met his gaze, no longer afraid of the feelings that had been growing inside her. "I believe I have." Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, Knox leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, questioning, and filled with promise. When he pulled back, his eyes searched hers. "I know it's too soon to speak of love," he said softly, "but I feel it growing, Beatrice. And I want you to know that whatever happens when we reach Colorado, these days with you have been the most meaningful of my life." Tears glistened in Beatrice's eyes, not of sadness but of overwhelming joy. "It's not too soon, Knox. Some things you just know are right." They reached Elizabeth Porter's hotel in Silver Creek, Colorado on a bright autumn afternoon. The town bustled with activity, construction crews building new storefronts, freight wagons delivering supplies, passengers disembarking from the recently completed railway station. Elizabeth, a practical woman with Knox's gray eyes and determined chin, welcomed them warmly, asking few questions about their hasty departure from Wyoming but providing Beatrice with clean clothes, a private room, and immediate employment in the hotel's dining room. "Any friend of my brother's is welcome here," she said simply, "especially one with the courage to choose her own path." Over the following weeks, Beatrice flourished in her new environment. She learned the hotel business quickly, made friends among the townspeople, and began to envision a future of her own making. Knox, true to his word, made no demands, though they spent every free moment together exploring the town, riding into the surrounding countryside, or simply talking late into the evening on the hotel's veranda. 2 months after their arrival, a letter arrived from Wyoming. Beatrice recognized her mother's handwriting and opened it with trembling fingers. "What does it say?" Knox asked, watching her face carefully as she read. Beatrice looked up, eyes shining. "They've accepted the partnership with Carson. The ranch is secure." She continued reading. "My father writes that while he cannot condone the manner of my departure, he understands I could not have been happy with Franklin. Her voice broke. "They wish to hear from me when I'm ready." Knox squeezed her hand. "That's good news, isn't it?" "The best," she whispered. "They don't hate me." "No one could hate you, Beatrice." Later that evening, Knox took her on a ride to a ridge overlooking the valley where Silver Creek was rapidly expanding. In the distance, a train whistle sounded as the daily eastbound departure began its journey. "I've been thinking," Knox said as they watched the train's progress, "about the future." Beatrice turned to him, noting the nervous energy in his usually confident demeanor. "What about it?" "I purchased land today. 20 acres with a small cabin just outside town. Good grazing, access to water, room to build." He paused, meeting her gaze. "Room to grow." "It sounds perfect," she said softly. Knox dismounted and helped her down from her horse, keeping his hands at her waist even after her feet touched the ground. "I bought it for us, Beatrice." If you'll have me, her heart soared. Are you asking what I think you're asking, Knox Porter? He smiled, a touch of vulnerability in his expression. I'm asking if you'd consider building a life with me, a real partnership, your dreams as important as mine. I'm asking if you might love me as I've come to love you. Beatrice placed her hands on his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart. I loved you enough to flee with you into the unknown. I love you enough now to say yes to forever. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the valley in hues of gold and crimson, Knox sealed their promise with a kiss, not an ending, but the beginning of a journey they would travel together, freely chosen, freely given. 6 months later, they were married in a simple ceremony in Silver Creek's newly built church. Elizabeth stood as witness, along with friends they had made in their new community. To Beatrice's surprise and joy, her parents made the journey from Wyoming, their presence a silent blessing on the union. "He's a good man," her father acknowledged gruffly at the small reception. "Carson speaks highly of him. Are you happy, darling?" Her mother asked, adjusting Beatrice's simple veil. Beatrice looked across the room at Knox, who was deep in conversation with her father about horse breeding techniques. "Happier than I ever imagined possible." Her mother squeezed her hand. "Then that's all that matters." Later that night, as they stood on the porch of their cabin, their home, Knox wrapped his arms around his wife and pointed to the evening star just visible above the mountains. "What shall we wish for?" he asked. Beatrice leaned back against his chest, savoring the safety and excitement of being truly loved. "Nothing," she replied. "I already have everything I ever wanted." And as the night settled around them, Beatrice Vance Porter knew that sometimes the bravest choice a person could make was to follow their heart, even if it meant riding hard away from everything they'd ever known, toward a future bright with possibility and love.